So can you start by just introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about the work that you do?
Sure. My name is Dawson Church, and I have a nonprofit called the National Institute for Integrative Healthcare. I've also written several books, and one of the best known ones is called The Genie in Your Genes, all about the effects of consciousness on the genome. And so I'm so excited by science, and science just shows us what's going on in the body and in the mind, in the consciousness, and in the world outside of ourselves. And so as an objective measure of who we are and how we heal, science is wonderful. So I really love looking for answers in science. And my most recent work is about consciousness and seeing how consciousness, things like mental states, like flow states, like meditation, like acupressure, acupuncture, these energy changes are producing measurable effects in the human body. And those effects are healing, those effects are large, those effects are often startlingly large. And so I love that whole trajectory of research and what science is showing us now about the effect of these ancient practices on our physical bodies.
Yeah, so can you talk about, I know you are big into EFT, emotional freedom technique, and tapping, and also energy meditation. Can you talk about some of the science and modern technology that's showing and measuring that these ancient modalities are actually working and working almost as good as a miracle drug?
So many years ago, these kinds of energy therapies were thought of as being something woo, something weird, something definitely not part of conventional medicine. They were called alternative medicine or perhaps complementary medicine. But what we're doing now in science is we're using the tools of investigation that measure, for example, genes and gene expression, and RNAs, which affect gene expression, and hormones, which are produced by gene expression. We're measuring all of these kinds of things inside the body. And so this field that seemed to be so ephemeral of energy medicine just 10, 20 years ago, we're now, as we're measuring its effects, we're finding that they're substantial in the body. And so it's now gone from being something that was thought to be really far-fetched to, for example, my courses are accredited. So if you're a doctor or a psychiatrist, you get credit from the American Medical Association for taking my courses. 10 years ago, that was not the case. And I just love the way that this is now working its way into, we were recently approved as an evidence-based therapy by the Veterans Administration. Kaiser Permanente uses these therapies. The Cleveland Clinic has classes for nurses to help them de-stress using energy therapies. So they really are making their way into conventional healing, conventional medicine, and I love the way that that is happening right now. So science, especially the science that allows us to look inside the body, is now providing evidence for these kinds of effects. For instance, we have 6 basic brain waves, from the fastest gamma to the slowest delta. And if you look at somebody hooked up to an EEG or an MRI, what you'll find is that when they are in certain states, when they're using EFT acupressure tapping, when they're meditating, that those brain waves change, not just slightly, they change dramatically. And those brain waves are doing things. Our slowest brain wave is delta. Delta is 0 cycles per second to 4 cycles per second. And it turns out that delta is doing things in our bodies. Theta is the next fastest, and that's 4 to 8 cycles per second. About that is alpha, which is 8 to 13 cycles per second. And so if you learn to meditate, if you take a neurofeedback class, you'll learn to generate alpha waves in your brain. And then that puts you in touch with those slower waves of theta and delta. So we'll see meditators going from small amounts of alpha, small theta, small delta, to large amounts of theta, large amounts of delta. In a recent study, I had some neuroscience experts in the room, and they were testing people on an EEG during a meditation and EFT tapping class. And at lunchtime, after the first morning, they were just absolutely astonished. They came to me and said, "I couldn't believe it. The people in your class were producing so much delta, I had to zoom out 4 times to capture it. And then I had to zoom out another 4 times, 16 times, to capture all the delta. I'd never seen delta like this before." Later on, one of them said that the person who she had hooked up was generating more delta than anybody they've ever seen in any of the other patients in their database. Now, what delta is doing in your body is absolutely amazing. There's one frequency within delta, 0.19 cycles per second. And again, cycles per second, just very simple measurement. So it's just the speed at which neurons fire. So if they're firing at 1 cycle per second, this kind of speed, that's slow delta. 4 cycles per second, that's fast delta. And so this one piece of research into aging. And again, the most important measure of aging is telomeres. Telomeres are these tails on our chromosomes that show how much we age and how stressed we are. People who are stressed, people who are angry, who are anxious, who are emotionally disturbed, their telomeres shrink quickly. People who are happy, people who are content, people who meditate, their telomeres can shrink less quickly or even lengthen in some cases. And so there is, in this one study, the researchers looked at 10 factors that contribute to telomere length, that build your telomeres. And they found that in delta, at this one frequency window of 0.19 cycles per second, there was a 10-fold increase in telomere production in that little window.
Wow.
Now, you get that window when you meditate. So in my book, Mind to Matter, I talk about these frequencies. And the big insight I had in Mind to Matter was I was looking at the effect of frequencies on cells. What causes stem cells to proliferate in your body? You need stem cells. They're the blank cells that can differentiate into muscle cells or bone cells or skin cells. And you need those for rejuvenation. If your body is injured, if your body is damaged, you need to have a big production of stem cells to go there and repair those damaged areas. So stem cells are critical to healing. The big insight in Mind to Matter was that frequencies can stimulate the production of things like telomeres and stem cells. And there were all these cool papers, which I was reading, showing that, if we apply this frequency to telomeres, they grow, or if we apply this frequency to stem cells, they grow. And I suddenly had this insight, this realization that these are the very frequencies we generate in meditation. So meditators, their delta gets big, and then that big delta is in the very frequency that causes the regeneration of telomeres. In theta, that next fastest wave, 4 to 8 cycles per second, that is the wave, there are certain frequencies in that particular wave that are to do with the proliferation of stem cells. And you need 3 things to happen for stem cells. You need to have proliferation, you need to have migration, you need to have adhesion. So you have to be making stem cells, they have to be proliferating, but then they have to migrate. And that's a different signal that makes them migrate. And a third signal makes them adhere to damaged tissue and help heal it. Well, it turns out that all of those frequencies are going on when we meditate, when we tap. And so we're changing the signaling in our neurons in our brains, and it's producing these phenomenal effects in our bodies. There are also neurotransmitters that are very important, and we find they balance in meditation and they balance in tapping. For example, one of the ones that we study a lot is the stress hormone cortisol. And cortisol, again, highly stressed people have lots of cortisol, and cortisol is in a creative tension with a second hormone called DHEA. And cortisol is your main stress hormone, DHEA is your main cell regeneration hormone. And when you're stressed, when you have an angry thought, when you have an angry reaction, your cortisol goes up, but your DHEA goes down. So your stress hormones are increasing and your healing hormones are decreasing at the same time. When you meditate, when you tap, the opposite happens. Your cortisol drops, then your DHEA, your main youthening hormone, goes up. So all of these things are in balance in this way in our bodies. And we're able to affect these things not just by actual stressors. A real stressor, an actual stressor might be if you were walking through the park one day and a great big pit bull broke loose from its owner's leash and ran at you with fangs bared. Your cortisol would go up. That's the natural function of the stress response. That's what triggers fight or flight, and that's a natural and appropriate rise in cortisol. You need high cortisol, high adrenaline when you're faced with a real stressor. But when I go home that night and tell my wife about the pit bull, if I have a big emotional charge around it, I'm going to stress myself. My cortisol is going to rise again, even though there's no pit bull around. That's going to depress my DHEA, and that's okay. for a few minutes, a few hours perhaps. But a few years, it's not okay. It results in decreased bone density, loss of muscle mass, decreased skin elasticity, loss of memory and learning. Cortisol actually produces calcification of the hippocampus, the brain's learning and memory center. Now, calcium, you want calcium in your teeth and your bones. You really do not want calcium on the neurons of your hippocampus, but that's the effect of cortisol over time. So if we're stressing ourselves, if we have PTSD, if we have chronic anxiety, chronic depression, we're producing all of these negative effects inside our bodies, inside our cells, by doing this. And energy medicine can completely turn all this around. In one recent study published in a medical journal called the Journal of Evidence-Based Integrative Medicine that I did with some colleagues, we took people for a week. We were tapping with them, doing EFT, we were meditating with them in the morning, and we measured their levels of stress hormones over the course of that week. Their cortisol, their baseline cortisol went down by an amazing 37%. Now, when that stress stuff goes down, the rejuvenation stuff goes up. So we measured another substance called salivary immunoglobulin A, or SIG-A for short. So we measured SIG-A as well. SIG-A coats the inside of your mouth, your nostrils, your eyes, all your mucous membranes have SIG-A in them. And SIG-A's job is to bind to toxins and to pollutants and all kinds of things that can harm you and neutralize them because you're breathing the stuff in. And SIG-A's job is to stick to that and neutralize it. So SIG-A is a really super important immune substance in your body. We found that as people's levels of cortisol dropped 37%, their SIG-A rose over that same week by 113%, a more than doubling of immunity. If this was a drug, if I were the head of a pharmaceutical company, I'd be rich. Being able to double people's immunity, but we do it just through tapping, meditating, being calm, thinking about the dog, thinking about the bad things in your childhood, thinking about the stress at work, thinking about the trouble in the world, and you just love yourself and love people the way they are. That's the crucial thing. It's love, loving yourself and letting go of all that stress and belief that you should be different, your wife should be different, your husband, your child, your parent, your job. We're always thinking that we'll be happy when. I'll be happy when I make another $10,000. I'll be happy when I move to Denver, Colorado. I'll be happy when I'm married or when I'm divorced or when my kid graduates or whatever it might be. So we're always having that goal of being happy out there. And the crucial thing is to learn to just love ourselves and be content and happy right where we are, with our bodies the way they are, our minds the way they are, our money the way it is, our relationships the way they are, with the world the way it is. If you just have inner peace, you are unlocking this cornucopia of positive neurochemicals, serotonin and dopamine. Anandamide. Anandamide is the bliss molecule. It's called anandamide after the Sanskrit word for bliss, bliss, bliss. So what you do when you meditate is you sit there and you have this explosion of neurochemicals in your brain. You have anandamide flooding your brain. You have oxytocin flooding your body. Oxytocin is the bonding hormone. So when a mother is touching her child, she'll have lots and lots of oxytocin going. When people are hugging each other or touching each other, they generate oxytocin. Even just Facebook friends can give you a shot of oxytocin. So when you have oxytocin and feel one not with another human being, but with the universe, in meditation, that produces a flood of anandamide in your brain. It produces all kinds of other good things too, like dopamine and serotonin and norepinephrine as well. So all of these things are happening inside your brain, inside your body, and we can measure them now. We know that there's a 113% rise in immunoglobulins because we can measure those things. And so perhaps one of the most stunning studies that has come out in the last few years is one in which a therapist was giving people 1 hour of EFT tapping. So a 1 hour EFT session, but a really thorough professional EFT session. And they measured the gene expression of those people before and after that 1 hour. They found that in just 1 hour of EFT tapping, 72 genes were upregulated. It was dialing up the action of 72 genes significantly just by 1 hour of tapping. And that by itself was big news. But what those genes do is remarkable in your body. Genes to do with metabolism, genes to do with cell repair, genes to do with regenerating the white matter, the insulation around neurons in our brains, genes to do with suppressing breast cancer, genes to do with suppressing prostate cancer, genes to do with suppressing colorectal cancer, throat cancer, various other kinds of cancers. All of these genes being turned on by 1 hour of a really good energy medicine therapy intervention. So that is what we're seeing now at the level of the body, is that these aren't ephemeral, these aren't woo-woo, these aren't these abstract energies that are out there that are just imaginary. They are producing concrete effects in your cells at the fundamental levels of your molecular biology. And that's why I just wake up every morning. I'm so excited. I just can't even wait to start my day. I wake up at 5:30 a.m. I meditate every morning. I often just cry. I sit there in meditation. I just weep afterwards because life is so exciting. How do you even contain all the love and the joy and the excitement in the universe? It's just so, it just pours out through you when you learn to place yourself in that spot. So energy medicine and these new therapies they're the future of healing. And I think we'll see them more and more in institutions because that's where people are suffering, that's where they need them. If people knew what these therapies could do for them, they would be amazed and they would use them. And that's my personal mission, is to encourage people to apply them in their own lives.
You know, you talked about generating the happiness before something happens, because we do the opposite. You know, we'll be happy when. Mm-hmm. If someone's sick, if someone's in pain, if someone's not happy with where they are in their life, they're overweight, they've got this diagnosis, how do you if you tell yourself, oh, I'm happy and I love where I'm at, they feel like they're going to freeze that. They're going to freeze their debt, they're going to freeze their illness, whatever it is. How do you coach someone through that? Or how do you explain, no, you've got to generate the feeling and then you'll shift or create something new in your life?
There are two main approaches I advocate. So I think many approaches can work and are effective. I like grounding, I like yoga, I love time in nature. There are many different approaches you can take, but there are two I think are essential to a happy life. One is meditation. When you meditate, you set up a baseline of well-being in your body. And the second one is EFT tapping, because then later on during the day, you've meditated 4 hours before, and now you get a troubling email or an upsetting phone call or a bad interaction happens at work or with a family member, and you feel stressed. That's where EFT comes in, because in 2 minutes, you rapidly lower your cortisol levels and your adrenaline levels. So people whose lives aren't working, and for all of us, our lives aren't working. We've all met celebrities. We've all met people who are best-selling authors, and some parts of their lives are working beautifully. And even our idols, we meet them and we find that they have feet of clay and parts of their lives aren't working as well. And so nobody has a life that's working 100%. That's just not the human condition. We all have areas of our lives that we struggle with. And so when you are struggling with a part of your life, especially a part of your life that is persistently troublesome, what we find, for example, is that if people are overweight, that weight has been an issue with them and they've tried to get over it often for years. The average American woman has done 18 diets in her life. The average American woman, over the course of her lifetime, will spend over $200,000 on dieting and exercise. She will lose her body weight and regain it 9.1 times over the course of her lifetime. That's a pretty grim set of statistics.
Wild ride. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, that yo-yo dieting phenomenon. So people just don't thrive with that, and they come and they then try these techniques, and they have very little belief that they can succeed. So what do you do when things aren't working like that? When things aren't working like that, it's important to break the energetic tension between the part of yourself that says you need to change and the part of yourself that says I won't change. And it's that energy field between them that keeps the problem in place. So Fritz Perls, a great therapist and the founder of Gestalt therapy, he called this the top dog, underdog dilemma. And so top dog is barking orders. Top dog is your inner CEO saying, you should quit smoking. Underdog says, oh, you're right, top dog. I should quit smoking. You're so wise. Absolutely. It's time to quit smoking right now. And so it's the same kind of dynamic as a dog fight. When one dog's lost the fight, that dog rolls over on its back and just exposes its belly and says, okay, you've won. And that's the underdog part of our psyches. And so one dog in this dog fight always wins. And that dog is underdog, because it agrees enthusiastically with top dog that we should lose weight and quit smoking and make more money and go on vacation more and be better to our kids and not be such a miserable person to our people at work and so on. So it agrees that it should be this different creature. And the moment top dog's back is turned, underdog sneaks on and smokes a cigarette and eats a pint of Haagen-Dazs and swears and yells and moans and groans and pities and all those things. So that model, that's the model of personal growth that has become entrenched in Western culture, is I'm going to have willpower, I'm going to be strong, I'll have positive thinking, I'm going to dominate this problem. That's the top dog, underdog model. And it doesn't usually work because it keeps all this energy locked in the struggle between top dog and underdog, when instead you just say, I love myself just the way I am. In our weight loss program, we don't let women get past first base until they have loved themselves 100% unconditionally and enthusiastically at the exact weight they are. We won't even let them go to week 2 until they've done it in week 1. They learn to do that. And then that unlocks that energy that is bound up in that struggle in the psyche between top dog and underdog for growth. And then the person then begins to grow. So that's the paradox of growth, is it begins with love and self-acceptance of yourself exactly the way you are with all your flaws. And EFT, that's the first thing we tap on. We have people tell us the problem. My problem is, whether it's money or weight or relationships or spirituality, we have them just say, even though I have this problem, and we have them do some tapping while they do this, tapping on acupressure points. Tap and say, even though I have this problem, I've always had this problem, I may always have this problem, I always have had this problem, I love and accept myself just the way I am. Now, when they tap, they start to relax, and that whole tension in the psyche gets broken, and they start to grow.
Amazing. I'm like relaxed thinking about it. But it's resistance and acceptance, like that first step in healing. I've learned it in different modalities and different languages. It's always that first step. You have to accept what is and stop resisting. Well, let's just go into some more testimonials, like a couple, the Veterans Project, for instance, because again, depression and anxiety, emotional trauma, it's just this. It's an epidemic that people aren't aware of. So how does emotional trauma and stress affect us, and how, what are you seeing with some of these modalities of how quickly you can heal it? PTSD
is a psychiatric diagnosis. So it's a diagnosis based on symptoms like, for example, avoidance of hypervigilance, insomnia, and flashbacks, nightmares are typical of PTSD, this collection of psychological symptoms. But it's actually a physical condition as well. It's a very real physical thing. There was a famous psychiatrist just after World War I called Abram Gardner. And after World War I, huge numbers of troops were coming back to the US from France, where they'd been fighting on the Western Front. And they had this condition that we didn't know how to treat back then. And it was called soldier's heart in the Civil War. It was called shell shock after World War I. And so the US Army hired Abram Gardner to study these men and see if a treatment could be found for this condition. And Gardner called it a physioneurosis, a physical neurosis. He didn't say this is psychological. He said this is physical because he could see that physical functioning was impaired. For example, people with PTSD, their coordination is off, their brain waves are off, their balance is off. If you look at old black and white movies of those soldiers after World War I, they're moving in strange ways, they're in strange positions, they're out of touch with their bodies. One psychiatrist at the Boston VA hospital talks about how when they got back from Vietnam, the veterans couldn't play basketball. They couldn't sink the ball in the basket anymore. They didn't have the coordination anymore. So physically, they were breaking down. And so it's not just a psychological issue. It's a physical one as well. And it's also an invisible one. People have this trauma, and you look at them, you can't tell. It's not like a missing arm or a broken leg. It's something you can't see on the outside, and their suffering is not apparent either. And if you look at the brain scans of people who are traumatized like this, several things are apparent. One is that when they are thinking about the trauma, very often their visual cortex is highly active. The visual cortex in the back of the brain is highly active. One of the 4 lobes of the brain, the visual cortex, is really active, often when people are remembering a traumatic event. But very often, Broca's area on the side behind the temple over here is shut down. And Broca's area handles words and language. So here they are vividly re-experiencing the trauma in their brains. But the part that can communicate the trauma and share that and tell that story is often offline. Yes. So they're trapped and they can't really convey the full horror of their experience. It is a terrible place to be. So with a group of colleagues about 10 years ago, I founded the Veterans Stress Project. And we got together therapists and we put them together with veterans, and we were giving them 6 sessions of EFT. We found that in 6 sessions, most of those symptoms simply went away. Their hypervigilance went away, they slept better, often after the very first session. All kinds of physiological symptoms normalized in those veterans. The first year, we looked like a total failure. We had 12 therapists, and we only had 12 clients the whole of the first year. So at the end of the first year, it was like, 12 people, right. We're not making much of a difference on the 500,000 Vietnam veterans with PTSD and the another like 800,000 people from Iraq and Afghanistan with PTSD. But we persisted, year 2, year 3, year 4, and at this point we've treated over 20,000 veterans free of charge, now more than 10 years later. So it's really snowballed, and we now have lots of people helping lots of people do this, getting all this to veterans for free. We've done 7 randomized controlled trials. They show people recovering from PTSD, and not only do they recover from PTSD in 6 one-hour sessions, but when we test them again 6 months and 12 months later, all those symptoms do not come back. So it's a permanent remediation of those symptoms. And it's wonderful to see those. One man, I tell this story in my book, The EFT Manual. I call him Don in the book. And after the first session, he said to his therapist, after just one session, Don said, I got my first full night's sleep since Vietnam.
Wow.
After EFT. Once he'd done several sessions with a therapist, he then was ready to tell about what he called the worst day of his life. His best friend had been killed, and the way it happened in that particular tragedy was that on the day his friend was killed, he and Don had been on patrol together, and they always walked side by side, and Don was always on the right, and his friend was always on the left. But that particular day, for some unknown reason, they switched sides, and Don was on the left, and his friend was on the right. So Don had this belief, survivor's guilt, for over 30 years, saying to himself, he took the bullet that was meant for me. Mm. And Don had physical symptoms, he had a lot of medical ailments. Again, PTSD was showing up in his life in many different ways. As he tapped, did EFT, and talked about that memory of the worst day of his life, he suddenly had an epiphany. And he suddenly realized, he said, I just realized, just the way I've always thought that I should have been the one who died, I would have wanted to die to save him. We were like brothers. He wanted to die to save me. He would have wanted to die. And so with that one cognitive shift, the whole story changed from not one of endless suffering, but to one of redemption. And so Don then got inner peace, and then of course all of his medical symptoms began to shift as well. That's just one of the literally tens of thousands of stories of veterans from the Veteran Stress Project.
That's so beautiful. What about depression and anxiety? You know, with social media, we have a bunch of teenagers, you know, suicide rates are skyrocketing in this country, which is devastating. There's obviously an opioid crisis because people want to numb their pain, you know, and most of it is psychological that's showing up physically. So what are you seeing in treatment of depression and anxiety with meditation and EFT or energy medicine?
So stress is a component of every single disorder and ailment we have. It's not all there is, but it's a big part of it. Stress is a part of pain. Stress is a part of performance anxiety. Stress is a part of social anxiety. Stress is linked to many physical ailments. In research in EFT, we find that physical pain drops by about 2/3 after people tap. So they come in with, say, for example, a 9 out of 10 pain. After tapping, they're down to a 3 out of 10 pain. So that's a big shift in pain because it's stress related. Those 6 points are the stress that people are experiencing. Same with depression, same with anxiety. There's a lot of stress and that affects people. They think that the world is the way it is. They think their bodies are the way they are. They think their lives are the way they are. And they are trapped in the sense of depression and anxiety. And also they might communicate that to other people. In my book, Mind to Matter, I talk about this phenomenon of emotional contagion, that social scientists find that emotions are as transmittable as the flu. You can catch unhappiness from people who are sitting next to you, and you can catch it from your family members and your friends and your workplace. And so, yeah. So emotions are contagious. In one famous study, researchers manipulated the Facebook feeds of just a few people, and then they went on to produce emotional contagion in their friends and their friends. By the time the experiment was stopped, out of ethical concerns, about 750,000 people had experienced negative emotional contagion on Facebook purely as a result of that experiment. So it's really important to have a sense of centering and to release your stress. Otherwise, it can play out in the form of depression and anxiety. And so when you learn to de-stress yourself, then you have bad things happen as well. I mean, it's not like we were exempt. There was a financial crash and people lost their homes and people, went under. Bad things happen, but you're resilient when that occurs. In one example is, this is from chapter 1 of Mind to Matter, is this TV journalist called Graham Phillips. And he went on an 8-week mindfulness and meditation journey. He was a skeptic before that, but he knew meditation produced benefits, so he thought, I'll give it a try. But before he began his meditation journey, he went into Monash University, and a biological psychologist called Richard Chamberlain examined him extensively. They did MRI tests of his brain, and they measured minutely the volume of each part of his brain. He then went on his journey of meditation, mindfulness, and after 2 or 3 weeks, he found he was feeling very different, much less stressed, much more objective about his life, much less likely to overreact. He went back in 8 weeks, and in 8 weeks, the volume of neural tissue in a part of his brain called the dentate gyrus, which governs emotional regulation throughout the brain, the volume of neural tissue in 8 weeks in Graham Phillips's brain had grown by 22.8%. A 22.8% increase in neural volume in the part of his brain that governs emotional regulation in just 8 weeks. Now, that's what happens when you're resilient. When you do EFT, when you do meditation, when you de-stress yourself, when you have time in nature, when you have healthy social interactions, when you do all the things that support a wonderful life, your brain starts to change, not slightly, but in major ways. Then when you face the financial crisis, or the divorce, or the delinquent kid, or the parent with Alzheimer's, or whatever it might be, you are resilient. This came home for me in a big way on October 9th, 2017, When my wife woke me up in the middle of the night, I looked up groggily and I looked at the alarm clock and said 12:45. And I looked out the window of our house, because we have a huge, big piece of property in the hills of northern Sonoma County. And we have an office building, house, several outbuildings. And I looked out the window, and there was a glow on the horizon. So I jumped up, walked out to the deck, and there was a wildfire racing down the hill toward us. And the lights went out. Suddenly it was dark. The power went out. And I just yelled at my wife, "We're getting out of here right now." And we literally ran, grabbed our cell phones and our laptops and ran to the car, which was at the other end of the property. We had to run all the way back toward the fire to get to it down our long driveway. And there were these embers flying across our path, like it was like a snowstorm. Later on, firefighters said that the fire was traveling at about the speed of a football field every 3 seconds. It was traveling very, very fast. And so we ran out through this hail of embers. As I was driving out, my wife felt heat on her head and looked up through the moonroof, and all the trees, all the branches above her head were on fire. And we just drove like crazy to get out of there.
Oh my gosh.
And after a couple of miles, we knew we were safe. But we had a big disruption in our lives. We got photographs from friends a couple of days later, and they showed that there was just ash all over the place, just ash, a chimney sticking up, no house, no office, no nothing. So we went through this year of adjustment to that, of going through the fire, losing everything, having all kinds of other chaos happen as a result of the fire, and being resilient. 2 days after the fire, we were staying at a motel all the way out of the coast. And I woke up that morning, and we were feeling very disoriented at that point. We just got the photographs of our house showing it was just ash. And we sat there in the bed that morning, and I said, "Christine, we need to meditate right now. It's more important than anything else, meditating." So we sat there and meditated. And we suddenly felt ourselves dropping back into our bodies. We were present again. And again, we built that neural tissue over weeks and months and years to being resilient. Now, it's not like we escaped the fire, or that magically the fire jumped over our house. We had to deal with the wildfire and the loss of all our stuff as well as many other people did. 5,300 houses burned that night, and 22 people lost their lives, 8 of them within 1,000 yards of our house. So we had all this drama going on around us. But if you built that neural tissue, that 22.8% increase in emotional regulation tissue in your dentate gyrus, you're resilient. You can deal with things. So we sat there 2 days after the fire, meditating, and after about an hour meditation, we began to think about not just what we'd lost, but what we'd lost that we didn't like. For example, I had an old massage chair in the garage, a huge old thing, and it was my job to put it on Craigslist and sell it. I suddenly realized, it's gone. I don't have to do that anymore. All those boxes of photographs my mother left in the garage when she died 20 years ago that I haven't sorted out for the last 20 years, they're gone too. I crossed that off my list as well. So we had to think about all the things we didn't like about the house, and we had to laugh about the whole situation. So again, that's resilience. That is what makes you able to meet those challenges. So again, these aren't just woo-woo, invisible, ephemeral, insubstantial fields of imagination. They are literal biological, neurological realities in our bodies, and they make all the difference to our quality of life. That's what these can produce in us if we do these practices.
That's amazing. Can you talk to us about coherence? And as I'm all about manifestation and co-creation with life, we're energetic beings, and you talk about coherence and intention. And a lot of people set an intention, but if they're incoherent, it falls short. So what is coherence, and how do we tap into it?
So what distinguishes somebody who is a manifester from somebody who is not? And I know many people who are wonderful manifestors. They have an intention, they want to see something happen, and then just effortlessly, synchronistically, it materializes. Other people I know have a lot of good intentions, but they aren't able to actualize their intentions. So they have these intentions, but nothing ever happens in material reality. What's the difference between them? I've now been hooking people up to EEGs for many years. And what we find is that people who are intenders, who are in mental and brain coherence, have much more of an effect than others who aren't. And the analogy I use is of a laser. If you take 60 watts of light in an incandescent or an LED bulb, it can do something and illuminate a whole room. But that's incoherent light, non-coherent light, scattered all over the place. Take those same 60 watts of light and put them in coherence. Now they're a laser, and you can cut through steel. That's the difference in coherence versus non-coherence. When we hook people up to EEGs, we see one of two patterns. Either they're highly coherent or they're highly incoherent, and maybe somewhere in between. All system activities generate coherence in people's EEG signatures. And those people who are effective manifestors tend to have high degrees of coherence happening in their brainwaves. They have laser-like minds, and they're producing these effects in the outside world. And so it shows up in that way. In one amazing set of experiments, researchers asked subjects to get into heart coherence. And when you're in heart coherence, that usually will bring your brain into coherence and other body systems into coherence as well. And so they had these intenders in coherence, and they had them intend to change the configuration of DNA. So if you can imagine a flask of DNA, and in this flask there is, in solution, there's human placental DNA, and then the intenders are told to twist those DNA molecules tighter. We can measure this too using certain equipment. So they were told, have the intention of twisting those molecules tighter. When they were in coherence, they were able to do it. When they were not in coherence, they could not. Also, people who were not trained in coherence, having the intention, were not able to affect the DNA. People had to be in coherence before they could affect the DNA. They then said to the people that they were working with, they said, okay, here are 3 flasks of DNA. We want you to twist the one in the middle, but leave the 2 on either side untouched. And so again, the people, these trained people, went into coherence, had the intention that only the middle flask change, and sure enough, the DNA was twisted tighter in that middle flask only. They then moved all 3 flasks 50 miles away. And again, had some people not in coherence, having an intention that they change, and nothing happened. But the people who were in coherence, they again could make the middle flask change without affecting the 2 flasks on the side. So even at a distance, our consciousness literally is affecting molecules in the world around us.
Wow, which is what we've seen in group healing as well, or
Yeah.
distant energy healing, right? Someone that is trained in that. Can I learn coherence? How do I get into, what's the easiest way to get into a coherent state?
You can do coherence in 90 seconds if you want.
Yeah, we love practical tools.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll do it. I'll have you in deep coherence in 90 seconds. So first of all, let's do a little bit of tapping. So tap over here on this acupressure point. Imagine all stress, all tension leaving your body. Imagine it as a pocket of resistance, as anything in your body that isn't flowing, isn't easy leaving you now. Just imagine releasing all tension, subconscious or unconscious. Now, top of the top of your head, and again, all tension is just leaving your body. Tap your eyebrow meets the bridge of your nose with 2 fingers. Imagining all resistance leaving your body. Tap the side of your eye. Tap under your eye. Tap under your nose. You're breathing more deeply, I can see that.
You can.
Under your lower lip. Tap your collarbone where it meets your breastbone. Tap about 4 inches below your armpit. One more time over here. Imagine releasing all stress. Ah, it feels good. Okay, now close your eyes and feel the natural rhythm of your own breath. Just the way your body naturally breathes. And relax your tongue completely on the floor of your mouth. Feel the volume of space inside your feet. Feel the volume of space inside your hands. Feel the volume of space between your eyes. Feel the breath flowing naturally in and out. Notice how relaxed your tongue is on the floor of your mouth. And imagine your breath flowing in and out through your heart. Breathing in through your heart. Breathing out through your heart. Tongue relaxed on the floor of your mouth. Big empty space between your eyes. Breathing in and out through your heart. Now slow your breathing down to 6 seconds per in-breath and 6 seconds per out-breath. Breathing in 6 seconds. Breathing out 6 seconds. In and out through your heart. Feel the energy of your heart inside your body. And then send a beam of that heart energy to a person or place that makes you feel wonderful. See the energy pouring from your heart to that person or place that makes you feel wonderful. Tongue relaxed on the floor of your mouth. Big empty space between your eyes. Breathing in through your heart, 6 seconds. Breathing out through your heart, 6 seconds. Visualizing that energy beam going from your heart to that person or place. And now expand the size of that beam and send love to everyone and everything in the entire universe. Send that love from your heart center to everything and everyone in the universe. Big empty space between your eyes. Tongue relaxed on the floor of your mouth. Breathing in and out through your heart. Beam of energy connecting with everything in the universe. And now gently bring that beam of energy back into your own heart, into your own body. And direct that energy beam to some part of your body that needs attention. Some part of your body that might be in pain. Some part of your body that might have low energy. Some part of your body that might be weak or that you struggle with. Bathe that part of your body in your own heart energy. Breathing 6 seconds in. Through your heart. 6 seconds out. Through your heart. Big empty space between your eyes. Tongue relaxed on the floor of your mouth. And with the next 3 breaths, prepare to bring your attention back into your environment. Back in the here and now. Feel the volume of space between your eyes. Feel the volume of space inside your hands. Feel the volume of space inside your feet. Feel the weight of your body on the earth. When you feel ready, open your eyes and look around you with soft eyes. Notice what time of day it is. Notice the largest item in your environment. Notice the smallest object in your environment. Notice a green object in your environment. Notice an orange object in your environment. And just welcome yourself back to having a body and feeling great in that body. Yay! That's deep coherence. And when you slow your breathing down to 6 seconds per in breath and out breath, that puts you into coherence. Now you're in heart coherence, you're that laser. When you extend that sense of connection out from your heart to another human being or another place, you go into deep coherence. When you imagine an open space in your hands and between your eyes, you go into alpha. And then when you extend compassion to the universe and all other living beings, what happens then is you start to generate activity in parts of your brain that you don't normally generate activity in that make lots of gamma waves. And so most people have very little gamma, very short bursts of gamma. When people are in that kind of a compassionate state, they have huge amounts of gamma. One piece of research found they had 800% the amount of gamma that normal people have. And those gamma brain waves are linked to creativity, to inspiration, and to healing. So you're doing all of this without any drugs, any meditation, any spiritual beliefs at all. All you're doing is breathing a certain way, relaxing certain muscles, having certain imaginary constructs in your mind, and suddenly you're in deep coherence, you're totally changing your brain patterns, and you're triggering neurogenesis of those healthy, resilient parts of your brain. Is that cool or what?
It's so cool. Talk about free energy. This is free healthcare. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So since this summit is about healing and giving people hope in what's possible, you know,
Right.
a lot of people get a daunting diagnosis, or they're told that it's terminal, it's stage 4, statistics look dismal, or it's genetic and you can't change it. Can you tell us a couple of, you have some fantastic success stories in your book. Can you tell us a couple of stories that will bring back the possibility to people, and you know, if these people in your book can do it, so can a viewer at home.
People surprise me, and the way they can heal surprises me. 2 stories come to mind. One is a woman who was in one of my live classes, and she volunteered to work with me up front in front of the whole class. And she described a history of sexual abuse. She was abused between the ages of 2 and 14. Now, in psychology, we call this developmental trauma. This wasn't trauma happening from a car crash at 25. This is trauma happening to a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old who's totally defenseless and whose brain is still forming. So this is not at the level of concepts or beliefs. This is the level of neural growth that this is happening. And this woman, when she told me her story, I thought, how can energy medicine or energy healing really touch this? She was also a therapist, and she tried all kinds of other therapies on herself, unsuccessfully, to heal from this. But we worked, and it was not an easy session. It was a very long and incredibly intense session. Everyone in the whole room was in tears watching her go through her process. But at the end of that process, she had a cognitive shift. And that's when you see the world differently, when your worldview changes after a healing event. And she stood up and she said to the whole room, I just realized I'm a happy person now in my life. I was a happy 2-year-old and a happy 15-year-old. Nothing that man did could take away my joy. And she just walked around. I had her stand up and just proclaim to the world, nothing that man did could take away my joy. Now that's profound healing. And we see this all the time with these energy techniques. That's healing of the psyche. And it's remarkable to watch people who are laboring under a lifetime of trauma be able to free themselves with these remarkable energy techniques. So that's an example of psychological healing, one of just thousands like that. We have 5,000 stories on EFT Universe, like of people who have healed from various things. My friend Beth was diagnosed with metastasized breast cancer, and she was being treated at a prestigious hospital called MD Anderson, which has several branches, and one of them is in Houston, Texas, near where she lives. And they eventually measured the tumor on her right breast as 5 centimeters, which is 2 inches, a very large tumor on her right breast. They also found, using thermography scans, that all of the lymph nodes under her right armpit were infected and swollen. And what it looked like it was happening was the cancer had spread from the primary tumor to her lymph system. And once it's in the lymph system, it's like being in the bloodstream. It can go all over the body, seeding cancer all throughout the body. They then looked at other parts of her body, and they found 3 spots of inflammation on her right lung. So it looked like it was, in fact, now metastasizing to other parts of her body. Beth was really panicked when she got the diagnosis, but when the oncologist gave her the diagnosis, in the oncologist's office, the oncologist said to Beth, this is so serious. Normally we would book you for your first radiation treatment next week. I want you to go straight from my office to the radiology department right now for your first treatment. But Beth said to herself, I need time to weigh my options and see what I can do. And she began to focus on energy and what she could do to shift her energy system. So she began to do things that had to do with energy healing. For example, she began to do Qigong intensively. She did energy medicine, got energy medicine treatments. We also did some remote tapping with her. We did EFT with her remotely. My wife would say, I am Beth in California, and then we were doing remote healing as a surrogate for Beth where we were. And we just began to imagine, as we tapped, that Beth's cancer was disappearing. So we were doing that. Beth was doing everything she could to lower her stress levels. She turned off all the alerts on her cell phone. She quit using social media. She kept volunteering for good causes that were stressing her out. She made her diet really clean, super clean, and she watched her thoughts. She got rid of all possible sources of stress in her body. One day she emailed me. She was in a panic. She'd had a gene test, and she said, the gene test showed I have 8 defective genes that predispose me to breast cancer. And I said, Beth, you have 24,000 genes that are perfectly healthy and happy. Let's work with those. And we did. So again, she used energy to shift her whole sense of well-being. When she went back to the doctor 8 weeks later, 2 months later, the tumor had shrunk from 5 centimeters to 1.4 centimeters and was necrotic, meaning just dead tissue being disposed of by the body. And all of the lymph nodes under her right armpit were completely clear and healed. All the cancer was gone from those. Later on, her blood tests showed she was completely cancer-free. So energy heals. Energy can heal us. Often energy, being a negative energy, negative emotional contagion, can make us sick. If we're around people who are pessimistic, who are angry, who are upset, it's going to affect us. So choose people who are positive and joyful. So
watching the news.
Watching the news. So we make lots of little choices every day. And you think, well, I'm just going to get mad at that person at work. I'm just going to swear at the other driver in traffic. I'm going to use this as my excuse to be angry. I'm just going to let myself have this little indulgence in negativity. And even though it might seem to be a little indulgence, cumulatively, those indulgences really hurt your body. I mentioned calcification of the hippocampus earlier on, the memory and learning centers of the brain. Research shows that optimists live 8 years longer than pessimists. So those tiny acts of consciousness and thought every day are affecting genes, affecting hormones, affecting your biology, affecting brain waves, and cumulatively, over a lifetime, you gain 8 extra years from being joyful and optimistic, and you lose those years if you're pessimistic. And there are lots of studies showing that the longevity effects of a sense of well-being, of kindness and of compassion are enormous. So these are all little corrections to correct our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, meditating, supporting our emotional well-being every day. Cumulatively, across the years, they have a dramatic effect on health and longevity. Not only do you get extra years at the end of your life, they're healthy years. You aren't having 8 extra years hooked up to a respirator.
Popping 20 pills.
Popping 20 pills. Or in an old age home, you have vibrant extra years.
Amazing. Sign me up. I know there's some fascinating studies with water and intention and energy. And we are made up mostly of water. So talk to me about water.
Well, there is lots of evidence showing that our consciousness affects molecules inside our bodies. What is really intriguing is the research showing that our consciousness actually produces changes in molecules outside of our bodies. And there are several studies that show this. But some of the most intriguing ones I like are to do with water. And they show that it changes intention, healing intention changes the molecular structure of water. So the structure of the water molecule is two little hydrogen atoms, and they're bonded to a big oxygen atom. And that angle of that bond between the three atoms is 104.5 degrees. That's just a known fact in chemistry, been known for decades now. But when a healer takes that water and blesses it and pours healing intention into the water, that bond can change. So the act of holding water and blessing water and flooding the water with your own healing intentions can literally change the molecular bonding angle of the atoms of the water. When that water is then used to water plants, they grow bigger, they grow stronger, and they have more chlorophyll in them than control plants do. So we're literally having this effect on molecules outside of our bodies. And again, our body is 70% water. Also, there are studies showing that our thoughts, our intentions, our consciousness has an effect on the four fundamental forces of physics. Those four forces are electromagnetism, gravity, the strong nuclear force that keeps particles in an atom together, and the weak nuclear force, like in radioactive decay. So our thoughts, our consciousness literally can affect all of those four fundamental forces of physics. In one really ingenious experiment, the researchers looking at the effect of healing on the electromagnetic field inside the room where healing was happening. And the way it was set up is that there were mice with cancer in a cage in one room. In another room, there were mice with cancer, and the second room was in a different lab, different building on the same university campus. And the healer was sending energy remotely only to the one set of mice in the green room, not to the mice in the red room. And they had a device below the mice's cage measuring the electromagnetic field of that room. And so at random intervals, the healer, again, it was distant from both rooms, got a signal, and when he got beeped at random moments, he then sent energy, healing energy, to those mice. What happened was that at those very same moments, there were fluctuations in that field, only in that room, not in the other room, by over 20% in some cases, and only at the moments when he was sending energy and not the rest of the time. So our intentions, our thoughts are able to affect those particles a long way away from us and make a difference in those four fundamental forces of physics.
Is that why maybe prayer works? If you pray for someone and that's sending intention to someone around the world, is that an explanation of why prayer might work?
Yeah, distant effects are really interesting. So one of the reasons distant effects work is that the Earth itself is a huge magnet. It has a North Pole and a South Pole. We measured with a compass. And that magnet of the Earth has rings around it of the Earth's own field. These are called the Earth's field, and there are resonances that these fields display. These are called the field line resonances. What happens is that the solar wind is rushing by the Earth very, very rapidly at about 2 million miles an hour, and when it hits these lines of force around the Earth, it's like plucking a guitar string or a violin string. It creates a resonance. These resonances also happen to be very similar to the resonances of our own brainwaves, alpha, gamma, delta, theta, and so on. And so what happens is that these resonances are around us on the planet all the time, making this kind of music as the solar wind rushes by. In a really remarkable series of experiments, researchers measured those field line resonances for a month. And they plotted them, and they go up and down over the course of a month. And they just got a measurement of what those looked like for 30 days. They were also measuring the heart coherence signatures of people in heart coherence, meditators who were in deep heart coherence. And they found that they tracked the field line resonances of the planet pretty closely.
Wow.
People not in coherence, their heart rhythms did not track those field line resonances. Now, that's really interesting. But what is even more interesting is that, think about this. If I am in coherence with these huge cosmic rhythms, I'm also automatically in coherence with everyone else on the planet who is also in coherence with those rhythms. So now if I have an intention, maybe I'm having the intention triggered partly by those rhythms, maybe it's coming from my own rhythms, but then I'm in sync with this huge cosmic cycle. So suddenly this is a plausible start of an explanation for distant effects, distant healing, telepathy, and so on.
Wow, it's amazing. Mind blown.
That was one of the two big original insights I had in Mind to Matter. I was able to explain all this as a way of showing how distant effects are possible. Because we've never understood how distant effects could happen. I mean, people say, quantum entanglement and so on, but there's no real proof of that. But there is proof of this. So we're affecting these molecules outside of our bodies all the time. So we're literally changing electromagnetism, gravity.
So we ask all the experts, what is your one takeaway message on healing?
There's nothing more important than love. It's all about love. How much love you feel, how much love you can accept. We actually measure the amount of love people are able to accept in some of our lab studies. We found that people often have a very narrow path, a very narrow orifice through which they can accept love. They're accepting small amounts of love. They believe they deserve small amounts of love. They don't believe they deserve lots of love. And so we really work on sharing with people that it's important to let go of the obstacles to love. When a baby is born, that baby lies there, and you can give that baby all the love in the world, and the baby just soaks it in. We're born expecting, anticipating infinite love to bathe us and surround us all the time. So that is the main place we need to get back to as adults. Tap away, meditate away, heal away all the obstacles to receiving that huge amount of love. Because I talk a lot in my books about non-local and local mind. We are little local beings. I have a local body. I think my name is Dawson Church. I think I'm wearing a blue shirt. I think I'm in a certain location on the face of the earth right now. That's my little local self. If you live your entire life thinking you are your local self, you missed out on the greatest show on earth, because you are not that little local self. When you meditate, the parietal lobe of the brain shuts down. The parietal lobe is the part of the brain that tells you that your body ends here and the outside world begins over here. That part of the brain goes dark in meditation, and you are literally one with everything. You feel one with everything, including non-local mind. And you realize that we are part of a vast consciousness, and that vast consciousness is nothing but love, full of love for us, just the way we as parents are full of love for babies. It wants our good. We live in a benevolent universe that is overflowing with love, and the only variable is our capacity to receive it. So all of these tools are there for one reason and one reason only, and that is to let go of the inhibitions that stop us from receiving that love. When you wake up in the morning and you meditate and you let go of your small local awareness and stop thinking that I'm this little human being struggling through my life, and you become one with non-local consciousness, everything is possible, and you are flooded with creativity and joy. Research shows that your creativity in those states, in those flow states, more than doubles. Your problem-solving ability goes up by about 460%. Your productivity goes up by about 500% when you're in those states. And so suddenly you then don't start your day as this little limited human being. You start your day in oneness with the cosmos, with this huge set of possibilities, in sync with everyone else who's in sync with it. So things happen synchronously for you because, again, you're in sync with these great universal cycles. So letting go of our small local sense of self and blending with that great sense of non-local self, that consciousness, once you healed, once you prosperous, wants you to feel absolutely vast amounts of love, once that resonating through your cells, through your brain, through your spiritual life, through your relationships every day, that cosmos delights in you thriving. And so when you let go of that little limited human self, you let go of local mind and you blend with non-local mind, you find there's a huge cosmos out there, It loves you so very much. You then bring that into your whole world. You become an agent of positive emotional contagion for everyone around you, and then you bring that to the world with such excitement and joy. You just jump out of bed every morning. You can't wait to live your life. So it's love. It's all about love and about letting go of all the obstacles to love that we have. We're born with limitations. We have conditioning that tells us we only have so much, that shuts us down. Trauma shut us down, disappointments shut us down. The work of being a human being is to tap away, meditate away, release all those energetic obstacles to love, and then let your life be a living symphony of synchrony with the universe, in which that love just pours through you in absolutely unreasonable amounts every day.
Woo!
Really, I mean, that's the truth.
I love your laugh.
And just challenge every part of you that says, I can't do that, I can't be that, because those parts are just leftover conditioning from your childhood that aren't true.